Welcome to the Aero Export Consultants Podcast. I'm John Young, and this is The Point. If you're tuning in today, congratulations on making it to 2025, where as always, we hope this year is better than the last. This transition from 2024 is actually the subject of today's episode. Last episode, we took a look into the future to predict what direction the Trump administration will be taking manufacturing, industry, and export controls. This episode, while we wait for the president to get settled into office and start on those predictions, I thought we'd take one last parting glance at 2024 and all the changes that came about in the last year. I think it's important to know where we've been recently export control-wise so we can have a better idea of what way we're headed. So with the help of BIS's Export Enforcement 2024 Year in Review document and my own library of podcast episodes I wrote for AEC's Partner Compliance EIB, let's take a step back and see where 2025 is kicking off from. So let's first start off with some of the enforcement we saw in 2024, specifically the punishments and targeted regulations that came out in the last year. 2024 was the year of expansion for BIS's Disruptive Technology Strike Force, the group responsible for protecting our advanced technologies from illegal acquisition and use from our country's adversaries. In 2024, the Strike Force added new cells to the force, and the Defense Criminal Investigative Service joined as a law enforcement partner alongside BIS, DOJ, FBI, and HSI. According to the BIS Year in Review document, the Strike Force's notable accomplishments last year included bringing 15 criminal cases, charging sanctions and export control violations, smuggling conspiracies, and other offenses related to the transfer of sensitive information, goods, and military-grade technology to the PRC, Russia, and Iran, for a total of 26 criminal cases since the Strike Force's inception. They also imposed a $5.8 million administrative penalty on TE Connectivity after its voluntary self-disclosure of the unauthorized export of low-level items to parties tied to PRC military electronics programs. And finally, they nominated 22 parties to the entity list for acquiring or attempting to acquire U.S. origin items to enhance PRC quantum capabilities. As you can see, the task force is growing in size and strength. BIS's Year in Review was also kind enough to break down our actions against specific targets in the last year. Our actions taken against illicit Russian procurement networks are as follows. BIS obtained the guilty plea of a defendant who played a critical role in exporting to Russia sensitive electronic components used in the development of nuclear and hypersonic weapons. They indicted several Russian nationals and extradited a Russian-German national from Cyprus on charges of procuring large quantities of microelectronics for the Russian defense base. They obtained a guilty plea from a New York man for his role in an illicit procurement scheme to ship U.S.-made electronic components to companies affiliated with the Russian military. They obtained guilty pleas from a Canadian national, a U.S. national, and a Russian-Canadian national for their roles in sending components used in drones and missile systems to sanctioned entities in Russia. They arrested a defendant in Los Angeles on charges he conspired to transfer hundreds of thousands of semiconductors to sanctioned entities tied to Russian military and intelligence agencies. They imposed a $180,000 mitigated penalty against a New York company for exports to Russia of solder materials used in electronics manufacturing, and they imposed a $3.3 million civil penalty on a California company for exporting transistors and related products, including Common High Priority List or CHPL items to Russia. Now, if you're paying attention through that, you'll notice some common themes in our actions against Russia. Electronic components used in military applications. You likely know that since Russia began its invasion of Ukraine, export controls have been slammed on the invader, with extra special attention placed on just these types of products. What we have here are some of the results of those efforts. Of course, while Russia has dominated much of our attention, we have not slacked this past year in punishing malicious actors in service of other countries as well. As previously mentioned, two other primary targets have been China and Iran. BIS details the following actions taken against these countries in 2024. BIS obtained a guilty plea from a Chinese citizen for illegally exporting a semiconductor manufacturing machine to an entity-listed company in China. They arrested a Chinese national for alleged theft of artificial intelligence-related trade secrets from Google. They arrested a California man on charges of stealing trade secrets used by the U.S. to detect nuclear missile launches and track ballistic and hypersonic missiles, potentially for the benefit of the PRC. They imposed a $500,000 mitigated penalty against Global Foundries for shipping $17 million worth of semiconductor wafers to a Chinese company on the entity list. They charged 4 Chinese nationals with conspiring to smuggle U.S. parts to Iranian entities affiliated with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, and Ministry of Defense and Armed Forces Logistics. They arrested a U.S.-Iranian national on charges of illegally exporting aircraft components to Iran, some of which could be used on the F-4 fighter jet operated by Iran's armed forces, and they arrested a defendant for providing material support to the IRGC and allegedly procuring sensitive U.S. technology that was used in IRGC military drones, one of which killed 3 U.S. service members. Again, we can see familiar trends toward these 2 frequent targets as well. Electronics, semiconductors, and drones are all areas of focus, especially towards China and Iran. Moving on from these 2, some other significant enforcement actions taken by BIS in 2024 include how they denied for a period of 3 years the export privileges of US Go Buy LLC, a package forwarding company, due to continued export control violations and failure to address past compliance deficiencies. They obtained a sentence of 70 years in prison for a Pennsylvania man who tortured an Estonian citizen in 2015 and illegally exported weapons parts to Iraq. They seized a $13 million Dassault Falcon 900 EX aircraft owned for the benefit of Nicolas Maduro Moros. They forfeited a Boeing 747 cargo plane previously owned by Mahan Air, a sanctioned Iranian airline. They arrested 2 defendants on charges of exporting millions of dollars worth of grenade launchers, Stinger missile systems, and other controlled items to South Sudan in support of a planned coup attempt. They obtained a guilty plea from the self-described king of notoriously violent Haitian gang for his role in a gun-running conspiracy that smuggled firearms to Haiti. They participated in the disruption of a botnet, likely the world's largest ever, which infected over 19 million IP addresses and facilitated cyber attacks, export violations, and billions of dollars of fraud. And they arrested an Ontario man on charges of obtaining firearms, ammunition, and other military-grade equipment with the intention of shipping them to North Korea for military use. I think it's important to take the time to go over these, to realize that actions do have consequences, and we will penalize those that seek to subvert American authority and undermine our country's export controls. In its attempts to gain military dominance over Ukraine, Russia has defied our laws again and again. China and Iran likewise have illegally sought U.S. technology to elevate either their economic or military standing. Their tactics are wide-ranging, their intent obvious. They seek to indirectly acquire, through diversionary and false means, American components for their own weapons. Our actions in the last year and beyond have been aimed at deterring such behavior, and I do believe that we have been successful in some areas. We have not made it easy for them, that much can be certain. The tactics grow continuously shady over time as they use shell companies and intermediaries against us, and it is against us. Those of us in manufacturing or in export compliance are their targets. It is up to us to be vigilant, to watch for red flags in our transactions with clients. In the past year or so, many guidelines and documents have been released to educate American industry so they might be prepared and protected from illicit transactions. And as highbrowed as it may seem to say so, we have a part to play in our nation's security, and it involves securing our own products and transactions. Are we alone in our efforts as industry professionals? And does the country stand alone as a whole in our attempts to heighten security? Definitely not. Along with resources directed inwards towards industry, like the Department of Commerce, Department of Treasury, and Department of Justice Tri-Seal Compliance Note, and periodic Don't Let This Happen to You and Best Practices documents circulated in America, last year also saw continued joint enforcement actions taken with international partners. BIS has said that, quote, with the assistance of foreign governments, they completed over 1,440 end-use checks in 60 countries. Partnerships were strengthened through bilateral agreements with allies such as Australia, Japan, South Korea, and the Swiss governments that, quote, facilitate law enforcement cooperation and sharing. The United States also hosted the second Export Enforcement 5 conference, which is used to, quote, expand export enforcement collaboration among the United States, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. We also published for the first time joint guidance with the G7, or Group of Seven, on preventing Russian export control evasion. I wrote an entire podcast episode dedicated to this topic not so long ago for our strategic ally over at EIB, so if you want the full details of that guidance, go over to EIB Export News for a listen. As an overview, the Group of Seven is an informal group of countries comprised of Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, the EU, and the United States. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the G7 has, quote, implemented unprecedented export controls and sanctions that restrict Russia's access to technologies and other materials required to sustain its military operations and illegal war campaign in Ukraine. The joint guidance we released in partnership with them was a detailed breakdown of Russia's attempts to evade sanctions and export controls, and the actions industry can take to prevent Russia's evasion. The guidance was comprised of 3 major sections: a common high priority list, red flag indicators, and best practices. Each section was designed to educate and prepare industry professionals to be on the lookout for Russian attempts to seize critical technology. I'd urge anyone who works with controlled electronics and other high technology areas to read the joint guidance and avail themselves to the information and resources provided by the G7. And while you're at it, listen to the podcast episode as well. 2024 was a year packed with regulations all the way to the end. We saw continued pressure mounted on adversaries like Russia, China, and Iran, as we sought to deter them from acquiring high technology and technology intended for their militaries. We sought to crack down on emerging technology as well in areas like semiconductors, quantum technology, drone technology, and even in the days leading up to the inauguration, we have seen additional regulations published around AI technology as well, a final massive document to carry us into the new year. But our focus has not been limited outward and at enemies. We also saw increased internal change in an effort to improve our own processes. Our policies in areas like voluntary self-disclosure and corporate enforcement saw additional attention from BIS. And for our allies, we saw new partnerships formed with widespread impacts on export controls. AUKUS will be a huge point of interest moving forward. As I type up this episode, nominee for Secretary of State Marco Rubio is being questioned on its significance at his confirmation hearing. What this tells me is that the government will not merely forget the actions taken in 2024 and the years before. They will have to be contended with moving forward. In 2025, there will be many changes. The first salvo aimed at AI classification has been fired by the Biden administration, a parting shot into an immense gray area of regulations. UAV, quantum, space are just a few of the industries that will be of massive importance moving forward. The partnerships formed in the last administration will be evaluated in the new, and that could hold serious consequences for all of us. Mexico and Canada, our neighbors and close trade partners, are already in the hot seat, and I'm sure that they will not be the last. As we move forward into what might be a vastly different era of foreign and trade policy, I advise all listeners to be vigilant. I, for one, am excited to see how export compliance evolves in the future. This episode, we remembered what BIS accomplished in 2024. Let's see what we'll all accomplish in 2025. And remember, for all your questions and export compliance needs, contact us here at Aero Export Consultants. Research done right, compliance made simple. I'm John Young, and this has been The Point.